Hi guys, my name's Seb Tudor, I'm the man on the Silver Mountain, and welcome back. Now today I wanted to touch on something that came out of the whole Cambridge Analytica thing, something that was mentioned a few times. I'm uncomfortable in my chair because it's too warm, and I wanted to touch on this simply because it's a really big and important thing that has been mentioned a few times and then left off to the side. And this is the matter of attitude inoculation. It's been mentioned a few times in regards to what AIQ did. It's been mentioned a few times in regards to what Cambridge Analytica did. It was been mentioned by both Chris Wiley, who is the whistleblower, and what's her name? The female ex-business development director, I think she was, of Cambridge Analytica as well, whose name escapes me at this moment. But attitude inoculation has been mentioned by all these people, and yet no one has actually explained what it is to people. And I know the ins and outs of it, and I've got a couple of examples to throw your ways on this, guys, because quite frankly, if it has been used to the extent that it has been suggested that it has been used, it should be troubling to everybody, because it means that through a very few small, simple things that are easy to do, entire swathes of populations have essentially been locked into one pattern of behaviour, which means that then when it comes to convincing them, even with evidence, it does not make any kind of difference to them, which is why I feel that them. Judging from the fallout of the Brexit referendum, especially when you had the reports of so many people searching for what Brexit even was the following day, and all of the other really weird Google searches about what the EU does and you know what it all means the following day, it suggests that people were locked into a specific place. And it was only after the bubble had burst that they realised that that wasn't a place that maybe they agreed with, but they had just been, brick by brick, little things, just locked into that place. So, to give you a definition of what attitude inoculation is, I will be reading from a lesson on attitude inoculation by where's the thing? I had it here a moment ago. It's from study.com, and it's a lesson that's been written by Erin Long Crowell. I don't know if that's the way you pronounce that name, but I'm going to go with it. And then I'm going to be referring to a couple of other things in a minute. But the way that they define it, and this is something I've looked into in other places as well, but this is probably one of the most concise definitions that I've come across, so I'm just going to read it to you wholesale. Attitude inoculation is a technique used to make people immune to attempts to change their attitude by first exposing them to small arguments against their position. It is so named because it works just like medical inoculation, which exposes a person's body to a weak version of a virus or bacteria. The weakened virus triggers the production of antibodies in response, but is not so strong as to overwhelm the body's resistances. Later, when exposed to the full virus, the body knows what to expect and is better able to resist than it would have been before the inoculation. Attitude inoculation then exposes a person to weak logical arguments that are contrary to their pre-existing attitude. This triggers the creation of counter-arguments in response. Later, when exposed to a strong persuasion technique that attempts to change their pre-existing attitude through logic, the individual already has arguments to use in defense, even if those arguments don't necessarily correlate to the stronger argument being put forward. Now, one of the places that I've seen attitude inoculation cited a lot was actually when I was doing marketing for one of my previous jobs, and I was one of the guys in charge of on-site marketing and other bits and pieces at the time. And so, me taking my job quite seriously, I got told a couple of things that I needed to do, and I went and did some research. I went and did some learning and some training and some development to actually go and find out more about what I was supposed to be doing and how I could do it in the best possible way. And as a result of that, that was when I first came across attitude inoculation as an idea. Not something I could use, but something that was fascinating. So this is something that I had maybe forgotten about for a while until I got to coaching and saw some of these things coming up more readily again. But then, especially when it's come up with all this Cambridge Analytica and AIQ and SCL and all this psyops against their own country stuff that the government seem to have been doing, this came back into my head. And the example is also one that I found written down on Wikipedia, because I went and searched for Mac versus PC Attitude Inoculation, and apparently this is the example that they've got here as well. And the example that they've given is that, again, Mac versus PC. During all of those adverts that they had, maybe, I want to say early 2000s, they had them fairly regularly, where you just had that I'm a Mac and I'm a PC stood there talking to each other about what they could do. And every single time, every single advert, you would have the Mac turning up, the PC suggesting how it was better hardware, and then the Mac directly comparing and suggesting that with the final word that their product was better. Is this accurate? Time and time again, I've been able to demonstrate to people, friends of mine who own Macs, that Macs are the less versatile, less useful piece of hardware for the most part. They excel in a few very niche areas, because that's the areas that they market to the most, so they have to make them robust in those areas. But in a lot of other areas, they are not as intuitive, they are not as useful, and their tech is usually a good couple of steps behind their competitors in various ways. And yet, here we go. These adverts that develop this culture of Mac versus PC in more than just a preference way, as more of a tribalistic thing, produced these tiny arguments for them, each and every advert, for the Mac users to take on. Now, those adverts are focused on Mac users. They're not trying to win extra kind of extra purchases, extra sales, because, well, if you're already using a PC, why would you suddenly change to a Mac? It's not going to be as compatible with the things that you already had running on the PC, or at least at the time it wasn't, when these adverts were coming out more readily. And so, who are these adverts marketed towards? Who are they being pushed towards? Well, they're being pushed towards people who have already bought Macs. They're being told that they're right, but they're also being shown the opposition. They're being shown in very weak and comedic ways the arguments that will be used against them, which means that they build up those counter arguments. Even if you can literally sit down with the specifications and it's by the numbers which one is better between a PC and a Mac for the same price, those people have already built up their resistances to adopting those other arguments and those other beliefs and those other things, whether they're true or not, and they will use them against them. In which case, moving forward, we can now see that, for instance, taking the Brexit referendum, a lot of people were in the kind of early stages of the campaign, where you had people putting up all kinds of weird ads. Remain was very paranoid, and they were very fearful. But then again, they were also, for the most part, playing with the data and the work of people like Nobel Prize winning economists and think tanks and economic groups and banks and things like that were all forecasting similar things. They were using as much solid information as they could to inform them, whilst Leave, all of it was around feelings and sovereignty and stuff that didn't actually really make a lot of sense when put under a microscope, but it was something that so many people felt about. They felt very strongly about, they felt very focused on it, and as a result, because a lot of the campaigning, a lot of the ads, a lot of the other things were small little digs, little focal points, little this is this and that's that, to show the opposition and then defeat the opposition instead of doing anything else. Nigel Farage, as much as he's a slimy little man, he does this very well, where as part of his guffawing, he will bring up what other people say and then defeat it, even if no one has said that. He will bring up a seemingly logical argument that could be used from the other side and then defeat it in his own very smug way. And I'm sorry if cars are going by outside, but I need that window open because it's far too warm. But it's a case of, he will do that and people will buy into it. And then they will regurgitate it and they will repeat it and they will do all of these things. And the reason why is because it seems to make sense to them. This is what Alexander Nix said in that footage from the undercover reporter who had a chat with him from Channel 4 when posing as a businessman trying to get him on board to do work for them in, I think it was Indonesia, Malaysia, something like that. I can't remember. But the thing that Alexander Nix said was, it doesn't matter if it's true or not as long as people believe it. And this is where attitude inoculation comes in, because it's getting them to believe things up to a point that it doesn't matter if the big things are actually, that their opposition are throwing at them, are actually true. Because they now know that the small things can be defeated by certain arguments, and so they will actively believe that the big things can be too. And this is part of the reason why the Brexit referendum, or the various discussions on immigration, the various discussions on welfare, the various discussions on the NHS, for instance, all of these different things within the UK especially have ended up running into problems. And one of these problems is simply that the people having the discussion on either side aren't having the same discussion, because they have both, to one extent or another, become inoculated to the thoughts and ideas and things of the other people, of their opposition. They've all built these little walls around themselves in this manner, with these small little things being thrown out one way or the other, which is where even the regressive left on one side and the alt-right on the other have done this as well, where they'll beat the small discussions. They'll beat the small, easily answered things. But then when you get to multivariant analyses of psychological sex differences, or you get to the fact that, matters around abortion, where it demonstrates a very specific and easy to understand thing that doesn't really pay into anything other than just like the rights of that woman or of those individuals to take care of themselves in the way that they feel is best for them. They can defeat the small arguments of those, but then when it gets to the big arguments, it all gets very messy. It all gets very muddy and cloudy, and it just becomes a shouting match because everyone has been inoculated to the other side. And the middle, the centre, often they've either become inoculated to both sides and so just shrug them off, or it's become such a mess, and such a loud, violent mess as well, that trying to dig into the mud with everybody else to try and pull them apart and sort everything else out is an awful lot of work, and it's an awful lot of risk, and it's things that a lot of people aren't willing to do. So it's one of the reasons why disenfranchising entire groups happens, because you've got those moderate groups and then they go, well, I'm not inclined to vote. I'm not inclined to go and do any of these things because each side isn't listening to each other. They're not willing to work with each other. They're not willing to do anything because they have built their little fortresses around themselves. How have they built those fortresses? One of the main ways is through attitude inoculation. Each brick by brick. If each brick is a tiny counter argument that's been thrown at them to develop those counter arguments on their part, then you've got a lot of those over time. You've got the Americans who are terrible with their attack ads, and yet each one of those attack ads, especially the ones that are very, very selectively created, like the ones that we've seen described by as being used by Cambridge Analytica, they are allowing for this attitude inoculation, for this very, very effective means of locking people away from each other, divide and conquer almost. And that should be a concern to everybody, because doing this in media as a jokey thing or to try and sell a product, that's it's not the best, it's not the worst, but also it's not as targeted. Doing it in the way that places like Cambridge Analytica did, where it's very targeted, that's terrible, especially when it comes to something like the decisions made over for the future of an entire country. It's a bad thing that should not happen, and people need to be aware of it so they don't get caught out by it, which is exactly why I wanted to make this video today. Anyway, guys, what other examples can you see of this, like, inch by inch, one counter argument, one argument by another argument, kind of just slow progression have you seen around you? I know full well that certain family members and certain friends of mine have unfortunately fallen victim to this, and once they've been locked and inoculated away, it takes a big impact or something significant to really shake them out of that space that they've been built into. So I'd love to hear your thoughts and examples of this. But otherwise, guys, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the video later on. Take care. Thank you very much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video or found it interesting, then please drop us a like, share this video, and subscribe for more. And I'll see you in the video later. Take care.